Good afternoon. My name is Simon Cowan, and I'm the Fellow in Economics at Worcester. I'm delighted to be chairing today's talk by Claas Mertens. This is part of a regular series of online lectures showcasing the research of Worcester's academics. Claas has a Leverhulme Early Career Fellowship at the Blavatnik School of Government, which he started in September, and at the same time he joined the college as a junior research fellow. He did his doctorate in international relations in Oxford and then had postdoctoral fellowships at the Blavatnik School and at Princeton. He works on geoeconomics, and the title of today's talk is The Price of Dependence, Europe's Path to Sustainable Cooperation. The format is as follows. So Claas will talk for about 40 minutes. He will take any clarifying questions part of the way through his talk, and then at the end, we'll also take additional questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A section on Zoom. As you'll see from the opening slide, there's also a chat facility. That's not for questions, but is an opportunity for you to introduce yourselves to each other and to message each other while, of course, still paying full attention to Claas's talk. We'll finish promptly at 6 p.m. local time, so after 1 hour. I'll now hand over to Claas.
All right, thanks a lot, Simon. Hi everyone, my name is Claas Mertens, and yeah, it's great to be here to be speaking to you all. I do have to admit I feel a bit on display because I think everyone can see me now and everyone else has their cameras off, but that's fine. I will just start sharing my slides and go full screen. So I think Simon already mentioned the logistical points for today, so I'll jump right in. As Simon mentioned, we have 1 hour. The first 35 minutes will be mostly me talking, although we will break for some clarifying questions. So this is really just for you to say, oh, I did not quite understand what you meant by this type of challenge that Europe is facing or so. Then I will talk a bit more, and then we will have a longer Q&A discussion at the end. Simon has already introduced myself, so I will go over this quickly. So I just a few additional words about who I am. So I've previously worked in business. I was then very interested by international politics, so I came to Oxford to do a DPhil in international relations. I then afterwards, like Simon mentioned, I went to the US for a postdoctoral fellowship, and now I come back. I have come back to Oxford, and I'm leading my own project on geoeconomics, so international economics, international conflict, and security. And the aim of all of my research really is to understand this tension between economic prosperity on the one hand, right? We get more prosperous through trade, and security on the other hand, right? These trade relationships that we can benefit from economically, they are also vulnerabilities at times. So all of my work really focuses on this tension between these two things. And in September 2025, I joined Worcester College, which has been really great. And yeah, I also look forward to meeting some of you at some point. I will share my email address at the end. Yeah, so you can also reach out to me. And I think, I mean, I don't really need to go much into why geopolitics matters at the moment, right? So just today, I opened the Financial Times an hour ago on my phone, and I saw today we had the most volatile oil market in the last 20 years, 40 years, something like that, right? So incredible price swings in energy prices in oil. And this is, of course, something that is hard for Europe. And right now that Europe is not really having much influence over, which will be the part of my talk that I will focus on. I also, you all obviously know Worcester College very well. I did want to say a couple of words about the Blavatnik School, which is where I also work. We do three things. You can see our motto here: a world better led, a world better served, a world better governed. What we actually do is we teach students. We have around 150 graduate students. They mostly do a master's in public policy. We also have some PhD students. That's the teaching bit. Then we, of course, we do research. And this is a big part of the Blavatnik School, which is a public policy school, and is in that sense a bit different from for example, the political science department at Oxford. We also spend a lot of our time translating our research findings into concrete policy recommendations. And for example, I work with the UK government to prepare their G20 presidency. So the G20 is a group made out of the biggest 20 countries in the world. This year, the United States will actually be chairing the G20, but the year after, it's the UK's turn. So we are working together with UK policymakers to prepare what topics to put on the agenda for G20 and to really make sure that the UK's G20 policy, for example, is informed by research and by our research. And yeah, so many of the things that I will be talking about today are also things that me and my colleagues at the Blavatnik School are discussing with the UK government at the moment. So let's get into the actual topic of today. So I probably should have mentioned that I'm doing, I mentioned I'm doing all of this research, but today I want to focus on one particular article. I think it's the most interesting for you all because it's more applied. It's very current issues that the UK and Europe more broadly is facing, and that's why I'm basically presenting this small part of my research now. So we have a situation where Europe clearly needs partners and partners need Europe. And this mutual partnership is important for all kinds of things, but in this article that I'm working on right now, it's not published yet. I'm working on this with a colleague from the Blavatnik School. We say these partnerships are particularly important for three things. The first one is security, then finance, and market access and trade. The big problem, and that is really what has changed over the last 12 months, is that Europe's dependence on the United States has really created a credibility gap. That means that Europe can no longer engage in effective partnerships with third countries. Things used to go fairly well from a European perspective. Europe used to be able to make attractive offerings to partners and thereby engage in these mutually beneficial partnerships. But we argue that this is no longer the case, and this is because of Europe's dependence on the United States to make attractive and credible offers. So the question that has motivated this particular project is how can Europe build more effective partnerships with the world? When I say with the world, I mean mostly with countries other than the United States and China. When I say Europe, I should also mention this, I am talking about the European Union, but I'm also talking about key partners, of course, the UK, but also Switzerland, for example, Norway, and in some instances also Turkey. And yeah, I'll leave it at this. And I want to give you two examples to exemplify this credibility gap that has drastically opened over the last 12 months. And we see some parallels here, both in the episode surrounding Greenland from earlier this year, and then in the Ukraine conflict over the last 4 years. Let me start with Ukraine, actually. So in the case of Ukraine, we had a situation where Europe and the United States were both supporting Ukraine's war effort, both financially and with military equipment. Now in 2025, the United States has reduced its financial support for Ukraine by 99%. So basically, the United States has stopped supporting Ukraine financially. Europe has actually really stepped up and has pretty much made up for this gap, this financial gap. So overall aid to Ukraine has stayed more or less consistent over the last year, but where the money comes from has really changed. So now the problem, or the big problem from the European perspective here is that despite having taken over the financial burden, um, there's still a big dependence on the US for military capabilities. So even though the money comes from Europe, um, this money is still used to buy US weapons. I think over 3 billion of this financial aid to Ukraine have been used in 2025 to buy US made weapons like the Patriot system, for example. And this is, of course, it's not just economically not ideal because we're stimulating the US economy with this. It's also not ideal from a strategic perspective because, of course, at any point the United States could decide to stop these weapon deliveries that right now don't really have a perfect substitute in Europe. When it comes to the Greenland case, again, we see this rift between the United States and Europe creating problems for Europe and for European partners such as Greenland itself. When Donald Trump announced that he wants to take over Greenland and he was also considering using force, Europe did actually respond in a pretty united way. Trump adopted tariffs over the issue against Europe. Europe actually threatened some economic countermeasures. Europe did send a few troops to Greenland, but ultimately it was clear that if push would come to shove, there was not much that Europe could do to prevent the United States from taking over Greenland. So the issue in summary is really that Europe is very dependent on the United States, and it needs to rethink its partnerships. And again, it needs to do this in three areas in particular. Sorry, I should have also maybe clarified this before, or maybe now is a good time. I'm talking a lot about this dependence on the United States, right? This is by no means intended to say the United States is a bigger adversary than China or Russia. Not at all, right? We all are very aware of Europe's former dependence on Russia for energy and Europe's ongoing dependence on China for all kinds of things, including critical minerals, right? I think the point of why we are focusing this particular project on Europe's dependence on the United States is really because this is something that has drastically changed recently, right? So yeah, that's an important point to clarify. And similarly, along the same lines, the United States is pushing very actively for Europe to become more dependent, right? So I think an interesting document to actually look at is the national security strategy that the United States government published in December last year, in December 2025, where it says something along the lines of the time where the United States holds up the world like Atlas is over, and it specifically also mentions Europe and that Europe must become more independent. So I think a lot of the issues that I'm pointing out here, they are really not counter to the United States. They are in many ways actually in line with what the United States government is asking from Europe. Yeah, so that's just a brief side note. Yeah, let's get back to the three things that Europe and its partners need from each other. So the first one is security. This is clear, right? I mean, we have Russia on our doorstep. I already mentioned the Ukraine war. Countries need security to be economically prosperous, right? Security is really the precondition for anything else. And when I talk about security, I mean both military security, of course, but also economic security. So the ability to not be coerced through economic sanctions, tariffs, all of these types of things by foreign countries. So this is also an important part of security that my research focus on, of course, especially. Then the second part is finance that really reaches disbursement, right? Finance must be predictable and it must be usable. There's a big need for investment. in Europe, but also in the world. And many people are currently arguing that there's a looming debt crisis. So before COVID, a lot of especially Western countries were not in terrible financial shape, but because of all the debt that countries have taken on since the start of the COVID pandemic, finance has become much more of an issue now for many governments. And then the third thing that both Europe and its partners need from each other is market access, right? So really markets to sell goods into, and thereby, yeah, have places to sell domestically produced goods and services. So now, why have these three things changed recently, right? What do we mean when we talk about Europe's credibility gap that has so drastically opened over the last 12 months? First, on security, there's a clear dependence on US hard power. And this is a vulnerability for Europe itself, but it's also a big problem for Europe being able to give partners attractive offers. To give you a striking example, European accession to the European Union and all types of other forms of economic integration with Europe, where in many ways people say one of Europe's most successful foreign policy offerings, right? But this was so successful not just because of the economic gains that came for countries like Poland and other Eastern European countries with joining the European market. It was also very much implicitly underwritten by security guarantees. And ultimately, these security guarantees did not come primarily from European countries. They really came from NATO and the United States. And now that we have woken up to the fact that these security guarantees are very much contingent and subject to constant renegotiation, which is something that has really emerged over the last year, Europe can no longer credibly provide this security umbrella to any of its foreign partners. Then second, on finance and the credibility gap here that has increased, that has opened, Europe clearly needs investment. We need investment in defense. We need investment in energy. We need investment in infrastructure. But the problem here really is that, and this is something that's especially prevalent for the EU, there's this constant initiative churn, right? We constantly hear about incredible, huge pots of money being made available, but most of the time this is money that is taken from one pot and repurposed for something else. So there's this initiative churn, and ultimately disbursement is slow and uncertain, which really undermines trust in the delivery here. And this is both a problem for Europe domestically, but also when it comes to international investments at the state level. And then also in the financial bucket here, we of course have the dependence on the United States dollar. So arguably one of the toughest economic weapons that the United States holds is the centrality of its currency, the US dollar. And here too, this has, of course, this was completely fine for Europe as long as US and European incentives, strategic incentives were aligned. But as these are now clearly diverging, this becomes much more of a vulnerability for Europe's ability to enter international partnerships. And then on the third point here, the market access, we of course we've heard a lot, maybe too much, about US tariffs in the recent months and year. And this is a problem for Europe, of course. Europe needs market access for its own goods, but at the same time, it's not that straightforward for Europe, again, both the EU and the UK, to enter new partnerships. Europe often likes to present itself as this great common market within which products and capital flow seamlessly. But this, even within the EU, is really not the case. The IMF recently estimated that all the internal barriers to trade within the European market, within the EU market, have the same effect right? They're not there's no tariffs within the EU, but they have the same effect as a 44% tariff. So there's really not a common European market in that sense. It's still very fragmented, and both goods and services do not flow as easily as um, they should, and as is often claimed. And also towards the outside of the world, so not just in Europe internally, but toward third parties, third countries. Europe is much more seen as a fortress Europe economy than a gateway to the world. And again, this is something where Europe perceives itself or likes to perceive itself quite differently to what countries from what governments from other third-party countries perceive that me and my colleagues are also talking to. So this is something we really hear from people in developing countries, but also other developed countries, that this notion that Europe is much more of a fortress than a gateway, and it doesn't seem to register with a lot of the European policymakers, unfortunately. So I've talked a lot about the problems and the challenges that Europe is facing, and I just want to sum up the key point here before we briefly break for some clarifying questions if there are any. So in short, in this particular article, we argue that if you are not independent, you cannot guarantee delivery to partners. This means there's a credibility discount, and ultimately this means you enter less effective partnerships. And these partnerships, of course, they should be mutually beneficial, and this is then ultimately a bad thing, both for Europe and for its potential partners. Yeah, so let's have a brief pause here. Simon, are there any clarifying questions that we should briefly discuss, especially along the lines of what type of problem are you really talking about? What did you mean with market access? Anything like that?
We don't have any open questions at the moment, Claas. Can I just ask just kind of one maybe it's not a clarifying one, but let me just ask it anyway.
Yeah.
So the dollar dominance is kind of notable in the fact that your symbol next to finance is the dollar symbol, not the euro symbol,
I
for
could have
instance.
thought a pound. I'm sorry, Simon.
No, I
But
wouldn't
yeah,
think of the
that's
pound. That's old history. But do you think there are things that maybe you should answer this later, but the European Union can do to, as it were, promote the euro as a global currency?
yeah, I do. I mean, this is
Mm.
something that I will also talk about in a minute, but I think
Yeah,
in short, there needs to be a more integrated European financial market, right?
yeah,
And this includes common debt, because ultimately you make a currency central by issuing debt in that currency, right?
yeah.
So if you do not have common debt, it's very hard to have a very central currency.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm getting some questions now.
Okay.
So there is one which is actually, are you going to talk about choke points? So I think this was the original title of the talk. We might
Okay.
want to save that for later.
I, I
Yeah.
can I can briefly take it. So I'm sorry that I'm providing some, this is my own delivery gap, right?
Yeah.
So I promised one title, and I'm presenting something slightly different. So my book project, this is the main research I'm working on at the moment. It's
Yeah.
on choke points, and the idea of choke points is very much that there are these specific parts in the global economy
Yeah.
that enable some states to inflict very high costs on other states, other governments.
Mhm.
And this is very much informing this research as well. But so I decided to present something a bit more targeted to Europe and
Sure.
current policy discussions.
Okay.
Um,
So we've got another Simon asking a question, quite a detailed one. So if there's a 44% virtual tariff within the EU, how much extra is it for UK trading with the EU? I don't know if
I,
that's answerable or not. So,
I don't know. I have to say,
yeah,
I have to be honest. I don't know,
yeah,
but I'm sure it's more, right? And it's
mhm,
obviously also a problem if you sell into the European market. Yeah, you have the friction between the UK and the EU, and then you have on top of that the frictions within the EU.
yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. And then another one, this probably ought to be the final one we take at this stage, I think, from Michael, saying it sounds like the EU will need closer cooperation to achieve these goals. I'm not plugged into Euro politics very much, but is there any appetite for getting closer like this?
Yeah,
Presumably more given recent events. So it's a kind of
yeah,
democratic question, as it were. Yeah.
yeah. So this will be part of what I will be talking about now. So
Okay.
it's a very important question.
Very good. Okay. I think we should hand back to you then, Claas, for the rest of the
Okay,
rest
sounds
of the
good.
talk.
Sounds good. And I will be speaking for another 10, 15 minutes or so, and
Okay.
then there's more time for questions also, of course. All right. So basically, how can Europe now address its challenges, right? And um, we argue that there are four capability building priorities that Europe should start with. And these are by no means the only things, but to now address this dependence on the United States that has suddenly become a major problem. For a long time, it did not used to be a problem, right? It used to be mutually beneficial. There was really no issue with being dependent on the United States and vice versa. But this has now changed, right? And so to address this and to build the right capabilities, we argue that first, Europe needs a better defense industrial complex. What we mean by this is that currently the European defense industry, it's not only relatively small in terms of revenue and size and output, um, it's also still very fragmented. So to become competitive at the international level, the European defense industry needs to integrate, right? We need scale to be competitive and to have interoperable weapon and defense systems. And there's of course there's both the supply side here and the demand side. What I mean by that supply side is the companies. You have Rheinmetall in Germany, you have Leonardo in Italy, you have of course Rolls-Royce and others in the UK. And these companies they need to merge more into one European defense complex that is more similar to what we see in other countries. And this is, of course, something that does not happen overnight, but it can be also incentivized, for example, through procurement. And of course, Europe is already working on this, but it's something that is really urgent now. Then a second area where we say this is a priority in terms of de-risking from the United States is digital sovereignty. Right now, we are literally right now we're speaking on Zoom, which is an American platform, and if we didn't have Zoom, we would be talking through Microsoft Teams. Again, an American platform, and of course, some people will tell you, well, the data stays in Europe and so on and so forth. But ultimately, there's a good chance that in a lot of these digital spaces, it's about data moving outside of Europe, but it's also about simply not having a substitute. So if Zoom would be switched off now, there would be no European alternative. The French government realized this a few weeks ago, and they've announced an initiative to build a European alternative. But the timeline here is still pretty long. So they are aiming to first roll this out for only French government officials, and it will really still take years to become independent when it comes to something relatively simple like a like a video call platform. And similarly, there also is a need for reciprocity. Again, this ties a little bit into this supply side and demand side type of question. So right now, a lot of companies from the United States, from China, they they get access to the European market, but it's not clear that this market access is reciprocal. So this is also something that needs to change to also scale the European companies that hopefully will emerge in this area. Then the third part here, in terms of priorities, is technological frontier competitiveness and capital markets. These are, of course, two slightly distinct things, but the underlying problem is the same, and it's the same as in the defense industry. The problem really is that a lot of European firms are no longer competitive for all kinds of reasons. Subsidies in China, subsidies in the United States, very fragmented regulation in Europe. And this we see both in manufacturing, and we also see it in the financial sector. London and the UK are, of course, a bit of an exception here, but because the UK financial system is still pretty competitive. But especially on the continent, there's basically little financial hubs in each member state of the European Union. And this, again, creates not enough scale. Another thing that is related here is we have some really good universities, including the one we are all part of. We have good research capacities more broadly. We have some pretty good startups, but there's a big problem when it comes to scaling these startups. So a lot of startups that start off in Europe, they later on to reach size, they move to the United States, right? So we really have this situation where our economic system seems to not provide the best possible environment for companies to grow into mature, bigger firms that take frontier innovations to market. And this then, of course, it's again, it's a strategic problem as well. It's not just an economic problem, it's also a strategic problem because new technologies, including in the military field, but all over, including artificial intelligence, they are basically held by other actors, by foreign countries and jurisdictions. And then the fourth priority that we are highlighting in the paper is surrounding energy and resource security. And again, this could not be more topical today. I think I already mentioned that the oil prices today fluctuated, I think, by something like $30 to $40 per barrel. And again, Simon, sorry, I'm using US dollars here. This only supports the point. But yeah, so of course, Europe is incredibly dependent on energy from abroad, including from the United States, right? A lot of the gas that we used to buy from Russia, we're now buying from the United States. We are dependent on oil from all over the world. And this also ties a bit into the question that came up earlier. These are choke points, right? A choke point, again, is a thing that allows someone else to inflict very high costs on your economy. The Strait of Hormuz that we've all read about in the news recently, and global oil markets really are a choke point, especially for Europe, right? Because we are just far away, unlike, for example, the United States, we are just far away from being self-sufficient in terms of energy. And this is something that really needs to change. I think I already mentioned there's always this tension between economic prosperity and security. And there's absolutely no way we can and should be self-sufficient across the board. But I think energy is one of the few areas where Europe should be self-sufficient. Yeah, I'll leave it maybe at that. An area that is also part of point four, where Europe will not be able to be self-sufficient, is when it comes more broadly to raw materials and especially these critical minerals. It will never be possible for countries like the UK on its own, but also for broader European coalitions to be completely self-sufficient here. And here the solution is really establishing a broader set of third country parties that is more diversified. So we have a more diversified supply of lithium, of all kinds of rare earth elements, and so forth. All right. So, and this was also already a question that came up, right? Where's the appetite for all of these reforms? And this is a crucial question, right? So, you have to have populations on board, and the way I just phrased it now, you have to have the population on board is almost also the wrong way, right? I think all of these reforms, they are actually an opportunity to get the citizens of all kinds of European countries more on board with a common European agenda. Because in times of peace and when things are easy, it's always very hard to make changes. In many ways, these crises now are a huge opportunity to become more independent, to reform a lot of the European economy, simply because the need now is so great. And I think that's the way to the thing to emphasize here really. And it will never be sustainable to push through all of these foreign policies against the will of the European public, the citizens. So credibility abroad, right? Foreign policy credibility does really start with consent and support at home. And I've now earlier I spoke about integrating the European defense industry. I've spoken about reforming energy, electricity grids, all of these things. And all of these things will make will make Europe better off. But they will not only create winners, they will also create losers. And this is, of course, something that has huge potential for a public backlash, and it's a big risk. And I think here the one potential solution is to also somewhat rethink the European social welfare system. When we look at different European countries, we see huge differences in how governments are managing, as the Americans put it, hiring and firing, right? So in Germany, it's very hard for companies to reform, for example, because they have employees and it's not easy to let these employees go. Of course, we have the polar opposite in the United States, right? The US is renowned for its dynamism that also comes from this flexibility in terms of labor. But this comes, of course, with all kinds of social issues that we might not want to create, and that again would also create a big public backlash against these reforms. So one solution here is what the Scandinavian countries are already doing. It's called flexicurity. And the idea here is really that you protect people, not specific jobs. So it's fairly easy for companies to hire and fire, but a much higher share of the domestic GDP is being used to retrain people. So people are not being let go and then forgotten about. People are really helped to transition into new jobs and new industries. And this idea of flex security, I think, is really the only way to make these reforms that we're proposing sustainable. Yeah. Then I should also say, relatedly, that it is crucial for European policymakers to shift somewhat from constantly new strategy documents to very clear delivery missions with clear owners and milestones, where delivery can actually be tracked. But maybe this is a bit of a side note. I do want to just quickly wrap up by saying that we do believe that it is the right time now. It's essential now that Europe refreshes its partnerships. It must make cooperation with partners usable under strain, and it can do so in a bunch of ways. It can pool strength by becoming a connector and a champion of what Mark Carney at Davos referred to as middle powers. Europe must become a more serious security partner for its own sake and also for the sake of its partners. And then this final point is something that I also propose in my book, which talks about economic security. There is a need for economic resilience clubs, and this goes beyond Europe. We need more of these coalitions of middle powers that guarantee each other supply of critical goods, and where the economic attacks from outsiders are very much viewed like a bit like in NATO, where Article 5 says an attack on one is an attack on all. and this provides incredible deterrence to attack NATO members. And this is something that these economic resilience clubs I'm proposing should also do to limit global economic conflict and put some deterrence there. All right, so thank you very much, all. I'm looking forward to discussing this more, and I think we have something like 18 to 20 minutes still left, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Claas. So we have, I'll just encourage people, please, to put questions in the Q&A section. So we have one now from Ross,
Yeah.
which I think is quite a challenge for you. Is the research pathway overtly influenced by Trump, i.e., it's a short-term policy issue that may soon disappear?
I think my I agree with the first part of the question. Yes, this is of course influenced by Trump, right?
Yeah.
By Trump one, but also by Trump two, and he has
Right.
brought a lot of these things on the agenda.
Hmm.
Um, I do not think this will disappear. No matter what happens in the US in a bit over 2 years from now, um, it's not going to be possible to go back to the old normal. This is not what the US public wants. I just don't see it. Even if there's a Democrat being elected, they will not reverse a lot of these things. I mean, I think this is something we've seen now also going back and forth between Trump and Biden and Trump again. A lot of the foreign policies, of course, not attacking Iran and Venezuela, but a lot of the economic foreign policies, they changed less than we would have thought in the 4 years that Trump wasn't in power. So yeah, I think Trump may go, but a lot of these challenges will not go.
Okay, good. I'll just ask from the chair, if I may, a
Yeah,
question. So you and your colleagues suggest four priorities,
yeah,
and defense industrial capacity, digital sovereignty, frontier competitiveness plus capital markets, and energy and resource security. Now, that is quite a lot. It would be extremely hard for Europe to kind of fix all of these things at once. Do you have a sense of a priority? Which of these is the real priority? I mean, could you rank these priorities?
that's a good question, Simon.
Hmm.
I mean, in many ways, security, hard security is really the foundation of anything else, right?
Yeah.
If you're not free from military coercion, if you can't be sure that someone will literally take over your country by force, um, economic prosperity is yeah, an afterthought almost, right? So I think there's a lot of research that frames also what we've seen now, the world order that worked really well for a lot of countries economically.
Hmm.
Um, we had this security umbrella that was provided by NATO and by the United States,
Hmm.
and that has enabled a lot of countries in Europe and Asia to make incredible economic developments. So yeah, I guess security would be very short my answer then.
Okay. Um, and so this I think relates to your issue about reform creating losers and kind of consent at
Mhm.
home. Um, I remember when, in the early days of the Ukraine war, there was a lot of discussion about the various sorts of weapons that European partners could send to Ukraine. And I was kind of staggered by the fact that every single country seems to have its own sort of tank, for instance.
Yeah,
Um, Now, that's part of obviously what you're saying is, hey, we need to do some rationalization there. But I mean, that would almost certainly entail closing down an industry in one country and saying
yeah.
let's concentrate it in another. So this is a kind of practical question. Do you think this actually could happen, or are the political
I think
constraints
it
just going
has
to be
to
too?
happen, to be honest, because
Okay.
it's a great example, right? If you have
Mm,
all of these different tanks and
mm,
um, modern warfare, and I should say I'm not an expert on military warfare, but
no, no.
it's really all about how you can coordinate your military forces. And
Yeah.
it's so much about these different systems speaking to each other. So if you now have 20 different, I mean, you have all kinds of different things going on at the front
Hmm.
line, right? But if you have five different types of tanks from five different countries, from five manufacturers,
Hmm.
this becomes close to impossible. So I think it has to happen. Yeah.
So we have another question from Andrew. So, what's the best way of implementing these recommendations? And have you any reason to be optimistic that our politicians are capable of following or willing to follow them?
Yeah. I think, I mean, this is it's a good question. And this is the key problem, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
for a long time we've had a lot of the right answers. There's, for example, the Draghi report by Mario Draghi, who he drew on an incredible pool of academics, also Nobel Prize winners, and he wrote this very long report on all kinds of policy recommendations for especially for the European Commission. And this has now been published a year and a half ago, and surprisingly little has happened. And surprisingly little has not happened because we did not know what to do, and also not because the European Commission didn't want to do things. The key problem really is always the domestic and the national politics that often get in the way. So then the question is really how can this problem of the national and domestic politics be overcome? And this is really difficult. But and I realize I'm just pointing out problems for now, but um, I think a key challenge is that a lot of national policymakers they go to Brussels, they go to these international meetings, and they will mostly talk about Europe, and they will agree to cooperation and these kinds of things. But then when they are back home, they have very different incentives, right? So when um, I don't want to name a particular country now, but if a head of state comes back home, faces maybe an election, they need to convince the domestic, the national electorate to be re-elected, right? And there they have a huge incentive to take credit themselves for anything that goes well in their country, right? So they will say all of these economic gains that you've seen, all of the good things, they are all thanks to my policy. But everything that's not going well is because of external factors that were out of my hand, because of the European Union, all of these, maybe it's because of other international things. So everything that goes wrong is being scapegoated on external forces, including common European cooperation. And this is really the challenge I think that needs to be overcome. And how can this be overcome? I think having more transparency, frankly. So we do need, of course, there's also the problem of the different European languages. This makes it harder in Europe to have common politics and the transparencies that align these incentives more and that create transparency throughout Europe. But I do think there needs to be a greater push for yeah transparency of what heads of states say in one place and the other, not just heads of states. Um,
So we've got several other questions now. I'm going to
yeah,
jump to the most recent ones. It relates to what we've just been talking about, but then we'll
yeah.
come back to the other ones. So don't despair, please, others.
Mhm.
So this is, where is the leadership in Europe to make this happen? The response to the Draghi report is not encouraging.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so basically there is none, right? I mean, this is
Yeah.
the short answer, and I guess now the question is what can we do about it? I think to some extent you can always there is some blame to be put on the people leading various European countries right now. There's sometimes there's a united response. For example, over Greenland, I would say the response was pretty united, but in many other cases, especially now with the Iran war, we see all of these different statements coming out. So the problem, of course, is that there is not one leader in Europe, right? We have all of these national leaders, but how can they lead more together, I guess is the real question. Um, and this is yeah, this is a big challenge. And ultimately, again, it's at the core of a lot of these issues. Yeah.
Okay. So we have Michael, I think for the second time, he asked one earlier. So it seems like one way forward would be lots of bilateral agreements, which isn't great from a consistency perspective, but might be easier to achieve sooner than a pan-Europe, pan-EU consensus. Is that likely, or is it just a naive view of the complexities ahead?
I would say, I mean, maybe the answer is a little bit in between, is my sense.
Mm,
I think we've now seen also post Brexit that this idea that we suddenly have all of these bilateral agreements and it's all very easy,
mm,
it's just not that straightforward, right? For all kinds of reasons. That said, I do agree with the notion that there needs to be maybe someone has, I think some a Belgian politician has called this the onion of Europe, right? There needs to be a bit more of a layered approach to European cooperation, where there might be some countries very much at the heart of Europe, and then there's different forms of cooperation as you peel the onion outwards, basically. So this layered approach, I do think that's right and that's important, but ultimately it's just very inefficient to have a lot of bilateral agreements, both from a bargaining perspective because you just don't have the size often, but also just from in terms of keeping track of all of these agreements and making sure they work together also. So yeah.
And then another one from Ross. Is there opportunity to link your research more directly with the private sector to influence required capabilities? So obviously you have business experience yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean this is a great question. This is something
Mm,
I've also been thinking about, and I've
mm,
been talking to a few people actually. I think I'm also very curious to hear from Ross and others what they think, but what the opportunities might be. But there are some well, okay, so actually I should first say the primary audience, the primary topic of my research are governments, right? So it is really this idea, how can we improve government policy? That's really the primary idea. But I think nevertheless, businesses are crucial actors because in anything where we look at international economics, the economic relationships and the economic interactions are ultimately not between governments, right? It's not the UK government and the French government and the Ukrainian and the Russian government that send money and goods back and forth. It is the businesses that do that, right? So businesses are a key part of my research, both from the government perspective, but I am also interested in um, basically how my research can be helpful to businesses to keep trading when it's useful for societies. Let's put it
sure.
that way. Yeah.
So we have another Simon. So given the blocks created by US, China, Russia, what scope, if any, is there for closer cooperation between Europe and Africa? Or have the Chinese already taken control there?
I mean, I think there's huge opportunities in the sense that yeah, I mean, I think I mean China is very actively taking control there, and
Mhm.
they've frankly done a pretty good job in many ways. We see this in all of these critical mineral raw material discussions, right? So China has also used government money to price out Western private companies out of buying mines in Africa. So they have really pushed back, and I think from the perspective of what a lot of African countries also say, well, they see us as this former colonial power that might provide aid when it's useful for us and when we feel like it. But I think they often feel like they do not get the right economic opportunities out of engaging and partnering with Europe. So I think this idea of having business relationships a little bit more um, as a partnership than as a former colonial power is crucial. Um, and I think there is also again there's an opportunity here because um, a lot of African countries they do not like China either, right? So they're very critical of China. So it's not like this is lost. But yeah, I do think it requires work, but it's a big opportunity. That said, I think um, I, we also must not forget that in terms of economic opportunities, there's obviously a lot of security problems that make it very hard to invest in Africa. Plus, the African market is pretty small. So it's all of Africa's GDP, I think, is smaller than the UK's GDP. So I think in that sense, there are some limits of what can be achieved here, but a lot of good things can be achieved.
Africa's share of world population will grow and grow in the
That's true.
future, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
So then we have another one, which might need to be the final one, I'm afraid, but from Gerald. So have we slipped too far behind the US to be capable of rebalancing the relationship?
It depends on the time horizon. I
Mm-hmm.
think if the time horizon is tomorrow, then yes. If the time horizon is 5 years, then no. Is my sense. I think it is often quite incredible to see how much can change in 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's not going to be easy.
Okay, so that concludes our questions. I think I don't know if Claas, if you've got anything additional you want
No,
to
I
add.
just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for the great questions. And I hope this was interesting to everyone. I'm around at Worcester, so please do feel free to drop me an email if you're interested, if you ever come to visit college, or if you want to talk about these topics more. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone.
Great. Well, I'll wrap things up there. So thank you very much, Klaus, indeed. That was fantastic, really interesting, stimulated lots of very good questions, I think, as well. Thanks to all of you who've attended. We are grateful for your support in many ways. I'll also say thank you to the college's development office and to Kate in particular for arranging and running the lecture. And do please keep an eye out for information about the Trinity Term online academic lecture series. So next one during next term. So we'll sign off there at that point. So thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.